And that means two things. First, as Barak has just said, Iran must give up its pursuit of a nuclear weapon. We urge the Iranian regime to resume negotiations with the international community without delay. It's not too late for it to do so. America and Britain, with our partners, stand ready to negotiate and to do so in good faith. But in the absence of a willing partner, we will implement with vigour the sanctions package agreed by the United Nations Security Council, and in Europe we will be taking further steps as well. Second, we desperately need a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians that provides security, justice and hope. As we were discussing over lunch, it is time for direct talks, not least because it is time for each, Israel and Palestine, to test the seriousness of the other. On BP, which we discussed at some length, I completely understand the anger that exists right across America. The oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico is a catastrophe for the environment, for the fishing industry, for tourism. I've been absolutely clear about that. And like President Obama, I've also been clear that it is BP's role to cap the leak, to clean up the mess, and to pay appropriate compensation. I'm in regular touch with senior management at BP, and the President is too, to make sure that happens. And the progress that's being made to cap the leak is a step in the right direction. Equally, of course, BP is an important company to both the British and the American economies. Thousands of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic depend on it. So it's in the interests of both our countries, as we agreed, that it remains a strong and stable company for the future. And that's something we discussed today. And let us not confuse the oil spill with the Libyan bomber. I've been absolutely clear about this right from the start, and in our meeting we had what we called a violent agreement, which is that releasing the Lockerbie bomber, a mass murderer of 270 people, the largest act of terrorism ever committed in the United Kingdom, was completely wrong. He showed his victims no compassion. They were not allowed to die in their beds at home, surrounded by their families. So in my view, neither should that callous killer have been given that luxury. That wasn't a decision taken by BP, it was a decision taken by the Scottish Government. We have to accept that under the laws of my country, where power on certain issues is devolved to Scotland, this was a decision for the Scottish Executive, a decision that they took. I know that Senator Kerry's committee is looking into these issues. My government will engage constructively with those hearings, and indeed my Foreign Secretary has already set out the government's position. So let me thank you again, Barak, for hosting me today. While at the World Cup our teams could only manage a score draw, I believe our relationship can be a win-win. And yes, I did enjoy drinking the 312 beer, cold, during the World Cup. I enjoyed it so much that when I watched Germany beat Argentina, I actually cheered for Germany. This is something that's a big admission for a British person to make, so the beer is obviously very effective. But what you said, Barak, though, about British and American soldiers fighting together, sometimes dying together, serving together, is absolutely right, and we should never forget that. Whether it's on the beaches of Normandy, whether it's in Korea, whether in Iraq, or whether now in Afghanistan. Our relationship is one that has an incredibly rich history. It is based on ties of culture and history, and yes, emotion too. But for all those things, I think it has also an incredibly strong future that is based on results. Results of a positive partnership, of working together, agreeing where we agree, when we have disagreements, working through them and coming to a fair conclusion. It's a partnership that I profoundly want to make work as well as it possibly can in the years that I'm Prime Minister of Britain and with you as President of the United States. So thank you again for welcoming me here today.
Thank you, David. With that, we're going to take a few questions, and I'm going to start with Mimi Hall of USA Today.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Prime Minister. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about BP. You mentioned, Mr. Prime Minister, your decision to cooperate, et cetera, but you said we shouldn't confuse the two. Have you flatly ruled out opening a government investigation into the events around the release of the bomber? And President Obama, how do you feel about a congressional investigation into this? Would you like to see that happen, or do you think that confuses the two events?
Well, why don't I start off, and I'll throw it over to David. I think all of us here in the United States were surprised, disappointed, and angry about the release of the Lockerbie bomber. And my administration expressed very clearly our objections prior to the decision being made and subsequent to the decision being made. So we welcome any additional information that will give us insights and a better understanding of why the decision was made. But I think that the key thing to understand here is that we've got a British Prime Minister who shares our anger over the decision, who also objects to how it played out. And so I'm fully supportive of Prime Minister Cameron's efforts to gain a better understanding of it, to clarify it. But the bottom line is that we all disagreed with it. It was a bad decision. And going forward, that has to inform how we approach our relationship with respect to counterterrorism generally. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize that I think may get lost in this current debate is the extraordinarily strong ties between our two countries when it comes to fighting terrorism. We probably have the best coordination and cooperation of any two countries in the world. And those relationships are vital, and they keep people safe on both sides of the Atlantic. And I want to make sure that even as we may express concern about what happened with respect to the release of this particular individual, that we stay focused on the cooperation that currently exists and build on that cooperation to make sure that there is no diminution of our joint efforts to make sure that the kinds of attacks that happened over Lockerbie do not happen again.
Well, I agree with absolutely what's been said about the importance of the security cooperation, something we discussed today. On Megrahi, look, I'm not standing here today and saying it was a bad decision to release Megrahi because I'm here. I said this a year ago at the time, that it was a bad decision. It shouldn't have been made. The British government as well should have been clear that it was a bad decision rather than going along with it. I took that very clear view. This was the biggest mass murderer in British history, and there was no business in letting him out of prison. In terms of an inquiry, there has been an inquiry by the Scottish Parliament into the way the decision was made. The British government, the last British government, released a whole heap of information about this decision. But I've asked the Cabinet Secretary today to go back through all of the paperwork and see if more needs to be published about the background to this decision. But in terms of an inquiry, I'm not currently minded that we need to have a UK-based inquiry on this, partly for this reason. I don't need an inquiry to tell me what was a bad decision. It was a bad decision. And if you like, the big fact that's changed over the year that makes it an even worse decision is the fact that, of course, Megrahi is still free at liberty in Libya rather than serving the prison sentence in Scotland as he should be doing. So that's what we're going to do, is go back over this information, see if more needs to be published, and, of course, in terms of the congressional hearing, make sure that proper cooperation is extended to it. Right, I think James Landale.
Just to stay on that subject, if we may, Mr. Prime Minister, first of all, would you be prepared to talk to your predecessors, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, to get their agreement to release any documents if they are relevant to the paper search that the Cabinet Secretary will undergo? And, Mr. President, can I ask you, the Prime Minister says he opposes an inquiry. Hillary Clinton has demanded an inquiry. Where do you stand?
Well, go ahead, Ben.
Well, first of all, on the documents, the proper process here is that the Cabinet Secretary should look back over this decision and the circumstances surrounding it, should identify those documents that should be published. It should be right that ministers in the previous government should be consulted about the publication of those documents, and of course we will consult with them over that. But in my view, there is absolutely no harm to be done in giving the fullest possible explanation of the circumstances surrounding this decision. I think the key thing, though, to remember is that in the end it was a decision by the Scottish Executive.